everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend a little bit of time talking about cards from Lord of the Rings, the card game. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Grant Thompson, as always, just along for the ride. Today we are talking about Lorien from the Trouble in Farbad Quest Adventure Pack. And it is a leadership one-cost attachment that is unique, that is a song, and it's attached to a hero. Exhaust Lorien to lower the cost of the next Sylvan ally played this phase by 1 to a minimum of 1. So, David, thoughts on Lorien?
This is one of the cards that you have to have in this deck type. But before we get into all the analysis, I did want to say to our viewers out there, Grant and I decided that we were going to kind of analyze and break down a deck, and we chose this Slippery Silvan deck here to begin with. And so what we're doing is we're really talking about how the deck, how each card works within the deck, and also how it works maybe outside of the deck. Sometimes cards don't make sense when you're running them outside of a specific deck type. We kind of learned that when we did Boots from Erebor. I love Boots from Erebor, but I'm running Hobbits all the time, and it just doesn't make, you're not going to put Boots from Erebor in a deck that's not running Hobbits or Dwarves. And so it almost doesn't do the card justice if we don't talk about it when it's built into a deck that highlights how it's supposed to be played. So that's where this came from. So Lorien is absolutely one of those cards that if it's not in a Sylvan deck, it's useless. It's really useless. It's because it's lower. Even if you're, playing high-cost Sylvan allies like Haldir or Rumil or whoever, that outside of a Sylvan deck, I just feel like you're not. What do I want to say? You're just not using Lorien to pay for those cards. You're doing it in a bunch of different ways other than Lorien. But when you put it in this Sylvan deck, this Slippery Silvan deck, where the cards are coming in and out of play, and you have to pay for them all the time, to be able to reduce the cost of your next Sylvan ally by 1 is awesome, especially in the beginning of the game. There's 3 cards that you want to mulligan for this in this deck, and that card, and you want to mulligan, and it doesn't matter which one of these you see, but you want to see one of those 3, and the cards are all attachments. It's Nenya for Galadriel, it's Lorien for Celeborn, or it's Steward of Gondor for either Celeborn or Galadriel. Any one of those 3 cards make the deck just speed up that much more. I mean, that's what it's doing. It's accelerating your board your board state. And Lorien allows you to do that because most of those allies are 2-cost allies. So if you're lucky and you draw a Steward of Gondor and Lorien in your first in your opening hand, that's amazing because you can pull out so many great allies right off the rip. And I mean, you're for those scenarios where you're trying to swarm your way across whatever, it's amazing. It works out really well. But outside the deck, Lorien is basically a coaster. What do you think, Grant?
I agree with everything you just said. I cannot say much more than that. I love the artwork on Lorien. It looks like it's Snuviel in the Forest of Lothlorien. So I like that. I love the flavor text for it, but it's too long. I'm not going to read it out. If you want to read the flavor text, be my guest. It will be. You can find the images of the cards on Hall of Bjorn, or pretty much if you've got it. You can
right, they can find it right here too if they're watching this on YouTube.
If you're watching it on YouTube, you can find it in that corner. David just pointed it.
Right. Actually, the flavor text would be like right in here.
Either way, it's on the screen. But no, David's right in his assessment of All Lorien. I've used it once or I've used it once or twice, but I haven't. You can't really use it outside of the Silvan deck. I mean, you can if you're running a lot of Silvan allies, but you're not running a generic Silvan deck. You could possibly use it, but you wouldn't get as much value out of it.
Yeah, absolutely not. I think there's more valuable cards to put in a deck slot than that if you're only running a couple of Silvan allies, and you can probably get more bang for your buck doing something else.
Yeah.
And if you're running leadership, and you have the steward kind of takes care of that particular issue anyways, most of the time.
Yeah. So
the only thing I'll say before we ring him, and I don't mean to cut you off, Grant, but the only thing that drives me nuts about this card is that you can't reduce the 1-cost allies down to 0. I wish that it didn't have that limitation, because a lot of these allies, there are some that have 1 cost. And so to take the 1 cost, like the Weaver, down to 0 would be very nice, because you're only doing it once. So, I don't know. I just wish that were a thing. The other thing is that you can take this coupled with Thranduil's ability, and with kind of like Tree People, you're bringing a card back into your hand, and then you're going and getting a bigger card or a different Silvan. Now you have that card in your hand. You may not have put any Silvans into play during your planning phase, so you may have Lorien still ready. You can use Lorien. It's not restricted as to when you can use it. So if you put Lorien in your and you want to bring in a card with Thranduil's ability, you can still reduce the cost of that card that you're bringing in with Thranduil, and it may be, and so you can use it whenever you want.
Yeah. One thing I will say is it's attached to a hero, not attached to a Silvan or attached to a Noldor. It's just attached to a hero.
Right.
So you can attach it to anybody. So, for example, if you are wanting it not to be discarded due to quest effects, like the Black Uruks, you could put it on somebody who isn't questing. Or if you don't want it discarded by a shadow card, you could put it on your attacker. It doesn't have to be a certain hero. It is very versatile in that manner.
Right, and that's something to think about. That's kind of a finer point of the game, is where do you put those attachments, and that's kind of knowing what the quest is and what is coming out in the quest. It's like, do I want to put Lorien on Galadriel, who isn't going to do much in terms of attacking and defending and questing because she can't, or is it better to put it on to Celeborn? It doesn't matter. You still get the effect from any hero that you want. So in general, I think I just kind of usually put the card onto Celeborn, but it probably makes more sense to put it onto Galadriel.
Yeah.
Because she's not if I'm doing the card draw reducing your threat ability, I'm doing that at the very end of the turn. Most of the time. Sometimes I'll want to draw a card. Maybe hope for Fang Voices or something during the combat phase, but it just makes a lot of sense to put it on Galadriel, I guess. So should we ring this guy?
Yeah, let's do it.
So again, just like we opened the show, we're trying to talk about cards that make sense within certain decks. So Grant and I, Grant came up with this idea to really, instead of just ringing it against the whole card pool, we will still do that, but it also makes sense to ring it as a card within your deck. Or within this particular deck. So we're actually going to do two ring ratings, one within the deck and one against the whole card pool. So, Grant, how do you ring Lorien?
Outside the deck, I ring it a 9. It is very situational use. Like I've discussed, you can use it outside of a Silvan deck, but you're not going to get much bang for it. Right. Inside the deck.
Well, I was gonna agree with you that because there is a deck that can be used, I agree. It's a 9 for me. A 10 for me would be a card that you would never ever want to use, but because there's a one deck type that you can use it, so I agree with you that it's going to be ringed a 9.
And for the deck rating, I'm ringing it a 1 because in this deck you need a good card inside this deck. You can pull out a high-powered ally for keeping the combat phase to finish off an enemy, or if you need a quick bit of questing in the planning phase, you could reduce it and pull in Orphan for two resources instead of 3, and pull an ally back from your discard. And it's just very ideal in this sort of deck. David, how about yourself?
Well, that's the exact reason there, because there's a couple of 3-cost allies that you want to have access to, and without Thranduil's ability, which doesn't require a resource match, like to bring out Orphan in the planning phase for 2. Now you don't want to do that in the first round, but in the second round or third round, if you had to chump block, you can bring a card back into your hand, and then like the wheels get going on this thing, and you're bringing a card back in your hand. Orphan can be cast for 2 or put into play for 2, and then like you bring another card back in your hand, and if that happens to be Galleon, now that you put that card in your hand, and then or back on the table, or if it's the Weaver, you put that card on the table. I don't know, like, so at the Elven King, Lorien is probably one of the most important cards to accelerate your board state at the beginning of the game for this hand. You mulligan to try to get that, or Nenya, or the Steward of Gondor. So I think that because of that, you have to ring this guy a 1 inside the deck. So join us next time as we talk about more cards from Lord of the Rings, the card game. Have a great day.